They were the men who made the nation laugh, cheer, and swoon. From the football terraces to the silver screen, these British icons defined the cultural landscape of the 20th century. But when the front door closed, the charm evaporated. Behind the blackout curtains of their luxury homes, a dark secret festered, a reign of terror involving fists, fury, and fear. Tonight, we shatter the pedestals of 10 national heroes to reveal the domestic tyrants hiding in plain sight. Sir Sean Connery. In the collective imagination of the 20th century, no man defined the concept of cool masculinity more than Sir Sean Connery. As the original James Bond, he was the suave, sophisticated secret agent who could disarm a villain with a quip and seduce a woman with a raised eyebrow. He was the ultimate alpha male, a rough-hewn Scot who had been polished into a diamond by the Hollywood machine. To men, he was an idol to be emulated. To women, he was the fantasy of the strong, silent protector. His voice, deep and commanding, was the sound of authority itself. However, behind the tuxedo and the Walther PPK, the man who played 007 held views on relationships that were as archaic as they were dangerous. For his first wife, the talented actress Diane Cilento, the reality of living with the world's most desirable man was not a fairy tale of romance, but a nightmare of volatility and physical intimidation. The marriage between Connery and Cilento, which began in 1962, was intense and passionate, but it was forged in the fire of Connery's explosive temper. Cilento was a successful actress in her own right, nominated for an Academy Award for Tom Jones, but at home, she was expected to submit to the traditional role of the dutiful wife. Connery, born into a hard working-class background in Edinburgh, carried with him a rigid belief system about a man's place in the household. He was the king of his castle, and any challenge to his authority was met with a terrifying aggression. Cilento later wrote in her autobiography, My 9 Lives, that the abuse began early in their marriage. She described a harrowing incident in a hotel room in Spain where, during an argument, the screen legend allegedly struck her with such force that she was knocked to the ground. It was a moment that shattered the illusion of their glamorous life, revealing the brute force that lurked beneath the Bond persona. What makes the case of Sean Connery so chilling is not just the allegations made by his wife, but the fact that he publicly admitted to his philosophy on violence against women on multiple occasions. In a notorious interview with Playboy magazine in 1965, at the height of his Bond fame, he stated, "I don't think there is anything particularly wrong about hitting a woman, although I don't recommend you do it in the same way that you would hit a man." He went on to justify the use of an open-handed slap if a woman was being bitchy or hysterical. It was a shocking admission, yet in the 1960s it was largely dismissed as man talk, a reflection of the era's casual misogyny. The world was so enamored with the character he played that they refused to hold the actor accountable for his repugnant views. Decades later, one might have expected a retraction or an apology as societal values shifted. However, Connery remained defiant. In a 1987 interview with Barbara Walters, a time when domestic violence was finally being recognized as a serious crime, he was asked if he regretted his earlier comments. Astonishingly, he doubled down. He told a stunned Walters that he had not changed his opinion, asserting that if a woman wants to have the last word and you give her the last word, but she continues to argue, then it is absolutely right to strike her. It was a moment of televised arrogance that revealed the depth of his conviction. He truly believed that physical force was a legitimate tool for a man to maintain control over a woman. The shadow of this abuse hung over Diane Cilento for the rest of her life. She struggled to rebuild her confidence and her career after escaping the marriage in 1973. While Connery went on to win an Oscar and be knighted by the Queen, becoming a national treasure beloved by millions, Cilento was often dismissed by the press as a bitter ex-wife. The industry protected its hero. Directors and producers turned a blind eye to the domestic disputes, viewing them as private matters rather than criminal acts. It was a conspiracy of silence that allowed a man to be celebrated as a global icon while his victim was silenced. Sean Connery died in 2020, eulogized as a legend of cinema, but for those who listened to Diane Cilento, his legacy is forever tainted by the knowledge that the hands which held the golden gun were also used to hurt the woman he vowed to cherish. George Best. If there was ever a man who embodied the sheer, unadulterated glamour of the swinging 60s, it was George Best. With his long dark hair, his mesmerizing skill on the football pitch, and his twinkling blue eyes, he was dubbed the Fifth Beatle by the press. He was the first footballer to transcend the sport and become a bona fide pop star, a working-class boy from Belfast who conquered the world with Manchester United. In 1968, after lifting the European Cup, he was the most famous man in Britain, a national treasure whose charm seemed limitless. To the public, his love of women, fast cars, and champagne was part of the legend, the George Best lifestyle that every man envied. He was the lovable rogue, the cheeky chappie who once famously quipped that he spent his money on booze, birds, and fast cars, and squandered the rest. However, behind the myth of the party-loving genius lay a darkness that was anything but charming. Best was a man consumed by a severe addiction to alcohol, a disease that turned the beautiful boy into a violent, paranoid aggressor the moment the front door closed. The demon drink was not just a social crutch for Best, it was the fuel for a terrifying rage that he unleashed upon the women who tried to love him. His relationships were defined by a cycle of intense passion followed by explosive violence. His first wife, the model Angie Best, whom he met in the United States in the 1970s, described a life of walking on eggshells. She spoke of a man who could be the most generous, loving soul in the morning, but by the evening, after the alcohol had taken hold, he would transform into a monster she did not recognize. The jealousy was pathological. Best could not handle the idea of his partners having independence or attention from others. He viewed them as possessions, trophies that belonged to him, and any perceived slight could trigger a physical assault. The public saw the glamorous photos of the couple at airports and nightclubs. They did not see the bruises hidden under oversized sunglasses or the fear in Angie's eyes when the cameras stopped flashing. The violence escalated significantly in his later years, particularly during his marriage to Alex Best in the 1990s. Alex, a former air hostess who devoted her life to trying to save him from his addiction, became the primary target of his frustration. The golden boy of football had become a sad, bloated figure, but his capacity for harm had not diminished. In her autobiography, Always Alex, she detailed a catalogue of abuse that shocked the nation. She described incidents where Best would drag her by her hair across the room, kick her, and punch her in the face with a force that left her battered and humiliated. One particularly harrowing incident occurred in a hotel room where, in a drunken rage, he allegedly cut her face with a set of keys. It was a brutal, cowardly attack by a man who was still being cheered by thousands of fans every weekend as a legend of the game.
These were real meals made by real families. From split-level houses in Ohio to ranch homes in California, dinner had to make sense during one of the most economically challenging decades in modern American history. Inflation was rising, gas was scarce, budgets were tight. Families sat down to hearty, filling meals night after night. So let's dig into 25 ground beef classics that quietly kept America fed through the inflation crisis, gas shortages, and the turbulence of the early 1970s. And if you're enjoying this trip through food history, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss what we uncover next. 1. Dutch oven meatloaf with crackers. Nothing captures early 70s ingenuity quite like stretching a meatloaf with a full sleeve of saltines. Between 1972 and 1974, beef prices jumped nearly 40% after herd reductions and price controls under President Nixon created unintended chaos. Home cooks responded the only way they knew how, by making do. The mixture went into a greased Dutch oven topped with strips of bacon and baked low and slow. The crackers absorbed the fat, giving the loaf a tender, almost airy texture, while the bacon created a glossy mahogany finish. 2. Tater tot casserole. Before Instagram sheet pan dinners, there was tater tot casserole, golden, bubbling, and proudly practical. Introduced in the 1950s, tater tots became a budget hero in the 1970s. A single bag could top an entire casserole and feed 6 people. Ground beef browned with onions formed the base. Cream of mushroom soup mixed with sour cream added creaminess. Cheddar melted across the top. Then came the frozen tots, lined up neatly before heading into the oven. 40 minutes later, you had crispy potatoes on top and creamy, savory filling underneath. 3. Sloppy Joes. Sloppy Joes hit their cultural peak in the early 70s. With 1 pound of ground beef and an inexpensive can of sauce, dinner was handled. Brown the beef, stir in the sauce, simmer, and pile it high onto soft white buns. Sweet, tangy, and unapologetically messy, it was kid favorite and parent lifesaver. No complicated prep, no expensive ingredients, just working class fuel served in front of the television. 4. Beef tacos. The early 70s marked America's first big mainstream embrace of Tex-Mex flavors. Taco kits made exotic food feel accessible. Ground beef simmered with a seasoning packet became the filling for crispy corn shells, topped with lettuce, tomatoes, cheddar, and sour cream. Were they authentic? Not even close, but they were a gateway, an introduction to flavors beyond meat and potatoes. Taco night felt adventurous without being risky. 5. Beef paprikash. Hungarian immigrants brought paprikash to the Midwest long before the 70s, but during tight economic times, ground beef replaced pricier cuts. Onions, sweet paprika, broth, and sour cream created a rich, brick-red sauce poured over egg noodles. It was comforting, deeply flavorful, and budget-conscious, an old-world dish adapted to new-world realities. 6. Stuffed cabbage rolls. Known as golapki or dolted kapusta, stuffed cabbage rolls became Sunday staples in working-class neighborhoods. Tender cabbage leaves wrapped around a mixture of ground beef and rice, then baked in sweet and sour tomato sauce. They took time, they required patience, but they showed care. In an era when many women were still expected to manage the household full-time, these rolls were proof that dinner wasn't just a meal, it was love. 7. TV dinner Salisbury steak. Swanson's frozen dinners boomed as dual-income households increased, but many families recreated Salisbury steak at home. Ground beef patties mixed with breadcrumbs and onion soup mix were pan-fried, then smothered in brown gravy. It wasn't steak, but it didn't need to be. Served in front of the TV, it symbolized convenience meeting nostalgia. 8. Calico beans. A potluck favorite, calico beans combined ground beef, bacon, and several types of beans in a sweet, sticky sauce made from ketchup, brown sugar, mustard, and molasses. It baked into something rich, smoky, and deeply satisfying. Cheap ingredients, big flavor, perfect for feeding a crowd. 9. Johnny Marzetti. This baked pasta casserole, ground beef, egg noodles, tomato sauce, and layers of cheese was a Midwestern legend. Easy to assemble, endlessly adaptable, and perfect for stretching ingredients, it showed up everywhere, from church suppers to school cafeterias. 10. Beef and potato casserole. Layers of thinly sliced potatoes, seasoned ground beef, and creamy mushroom sauce baked into a filling one-dish meal. It was meat and potatoes philosophy in casserole form, simple, hearty, and dependable. 11. Cocktail meatballs. No 1970s gathering was complete without sweet and savory meatballs simmered in chili sauce and grape jelly. They were glossy, toothpick-ready, and surprisingly addictive. The sauce sounded strange but worked beautifully. They weren't about authenticity, they were about hosting with confidence. 12. Cowboy casserole. Ground beef, corn, tomato soup, and cheese topped with biscuit dough baked into a hearty skillet meal. It was bold, filling, and built for hungry families who valued substance over presentation. 13. beef and rice skillet. 1 pan, ground beef, rice, vegetables, broth. Simmered together until tender and flavorful. Minimal cleanup, maximum payoff. Efficiency was the point. Hamburger stew. On cold winter nights, hamburger stew simmered for hours. Ground beef, potatoes, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and broth. It was practical, comforting, and endlessly stretchable. 14. Cheeseburger pie. Thanks to Bisquick's impossible pie magic, ground beef and cheddar baked into a self-forming crust. It sliced like pie, but tasted like a cheeseburger. Space-age convenience at its peak. 15. Swedish meatballs. Americanized Swedish meatballs simplified tradition into ground beef balls seasoned with nutmeg and allspice, simmered in creamy gravy. Served over noodles with cranberry sauce, they felt festive without being complicated. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. A Depression-era holdover that thrived in the 70s, hamburger gravy turned 1 pound of beef into dinner for 6.